Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. I'm Tom, and today we are going to be talking about While Darkness Gathers, the standalone sequel to the Edan trilogy by fellow booktuber Philip Chase. And I do just want to say very quickly that I very much enjoyed the original trilogy. It was probably a top 10 series all time for me before this book came out, and I ended up giving While Darkness Gathers a 4-star rating. So it really only bumped that feeling up even more. I really had a great time with this book. If you want to see more about what ratings mean to me, I have videos of that on my channel, so you can really understand my ranking system and everything. And I do just want to say quickly before we get into this, if you are looking at this as maybe being an entry into the series, I'm going to dissuade you from that. You could definitely read this and probably have a good time with it, but there is a lot of emotional impact, things that happen between different characters and characters that may or may not be from the original trilogy, that I really think that you should read the original trilogy first. So if you were hoping you could just read this to kind of get a taste for the world, unfortunately, I'm personally going to say no. I really do think you should read the trilogy first, and then come back to this definitely afterwards. So with that being said, I also do want to mention that I will do my absolute best to keep not only this book completely spoiler free, but not spoil anything from the original trilogy. So I'm definitely going to be looking at some notes and being more vague than I normally would be in one of these videos, because normally I'd like to get a little bit deeper and maybe be a little bit more specific. But with trying to keep it spoiler free for this book and the original trilogy, please, give me a little bit of grace, as I maybe am a little bit more all over the place than normal. If you do want to hear some of my more spoiler thoughts for this book, if you've already read this and want to see a little bit more what I think, I have the awesome opportunity to join Jake and Nikhil. Jake over at Nerd Level Rising. He is putting together a chat with us three, and I think we're definitely going to get into spoilers in that. I'll either have that linked or definitely have it in a community post whenever that video is done and up and all of that fun stuff. So definitely you will be able to get spoiler thoughts from me at some point about this book, because I do think there are some really interesting things to talk about that happen later on this book that unfortunately only can really do in a spoiler-filled way. And I want to keep this video as spoiler-free as possible. If you maybe have already read the original trilogy and are thinking, is it worth it to pick this up? Is this a worthy sequel? And I kind of already spoiled that. I definitely think that it is. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about what I enjoyed about this book. I'm, like I said, going to try to keep talking about the original trilogy to a minimum. But my very first point is that I really enjoyed the writing in this one. And it's an interesting thing because I also really enjoyed the writing in the original trilogy. And you would think, well, it's probably written the same. It's the same author. And while there is definitely the same quality of writing, it is definitely told in a different way. And I do think that at times in the original trilogy, I don't want to call it indulgent because that's not the word I'm looking for, but I do think the original trilogy has this almost feel of like an author who is really enjoying the craft of writing and is maybe expounding a little bit in a way that is definitely more, I'll call classical fantasy, and that's not in a bad way. I really, like I said, I enjoyed it. It was definitely something that took me a little bit to get used to, because I do think in the first book in particular, I maybe struggled with that a little bit more. But as the series got on, I actually really got into a flow with it and really enjoyed the writing. And what I will say is there's still hints of that there. Like, it's definitely still Philip's writing, but it feels like it's maybe almost pared back a little bit. I think he has talked about he was very intentional in writing this book and writing it a little bit differently. And I do think that is definitely something that comes across on the page, but I think it actually really improves the reading experience of this book for what it is trying to do. This book is, and once again, this is me being vague again. I don't even want to read the back of the book because I feel like it kind of tells you things from the original trilogy, right? But this is very much more almost of a quest fantasy kind of book where we're going into a place to do a very specific thing, right? And I feel like if that same kind of writing was used in this story, it would maybe make it feel slower, and it would be slower, right? But I feel like this story really excels as being a more fast-paced story where we're not spending all this detail expounding upon landscapes and some of the more beautiful writing that happens in the original trilogy. It's a lot more like we're getting there. And I think it really worked well, especially in a standalone sequel with like the pacing. I think it's just something that works really well, and that is something that I actually really enjoyed in this one. And at first, it kind of caught me off guard. I remember reading it at first, and I was reading it on, I have a physical edition, but I was actually reading the ebook version of it. And I went to look at the percentage of the book I was in, and I was blown away that I was already 20% into it, because I'm not a fast reader, but I was blowing through it, and it was just, very snappy and quick. And it was something I really enjoyed. It was a good change of pace while still keeping like ties to the original trilogy. Like, you still felt it, but it was very much a deliberate difference from those first couple of books. And speaking again back to the original trilogy, While Darkness Gathers does a beautiful job of blending what I'm going to call legacy characters, because I don't want to say who those characters are, but there are legacy characters that are mentioned and are in this book from the original trilogy, while still blending it perfectly with our new cast of characters. So we do get a whole new set of characters that we follow and have new experiences with, new perspectives, all these kinds of things. And I think it can definitely be to the detriment of a lot of series, not in this one, where maybe the legacy characters aren't treated the way that I, as a reader, feel like they should. And I think this book does a beautiful job of making those characters still feel important, them still feel like themselves, and just like that perfect job of having those new groups and the old groups blend together, interact, and all of that kind of stuff. I'll say in the last book in the original trilogy, Return to Adan, that book opens up with introducing a new character. And I can remember at the time being so worried, because normally that late into a book, into a series, I really normally don't gel with a brand new character being thrown at you that late into a series, and one who ends up playing as big of a role as that character does. I feel like the same kind of thing happened here, where we're introduced to this new team, right? And I was like, oh, kind of not arms crossed, because I was looking forward to it, but like the same kind of thing happened where I was like maybe apprehensive about it, where I really just kind of wanted to spend time with a character I already knew and loved. And by the end of this book, and not by the end of it, but like as I got more and more into it, I absolutely adored that new cast of characters. And the same thing happened with that new character who was introduced into the last book as well. So it's definitely something that Philip has a knack for, of getting you endeared to these characters very quickly. And like I said, this is a very short, quick book. Like, it's a 300-page fantasy book. That is insane. Like, that is not something that normally happens in fantasy. And in that little bit of page count, he is able to make you care about all of these new characters. I won't say as much as the legacy ones, but like pretty much just as much. Like, you feel that connection to these characters. And I think it's very well done. So once again, character work, super, super awesome here. Now for the thing that I think works the best in this book is that emotional impact. Some of it does have to tie into legacy characters. You have your heartstrings are pulled because you know and care about these characters you already exist for, but you still get some of those same emotional impactful moments from these new characters. You feel for them. And I'm a big person on the emotional impact, the things that happen. And if you remember back to a couple of my weekly updates, there was something happening very early on in this book where I was talking about having beef with Philip Chase, because I just could not believe what he was doing early on in this book. And I was just like, no, there's no way. And I obviously can't say what happened or who would have involved in everything, but it just was like pulling on my heartstrings, and it was just super well done. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And that happens more than once. And you are invested in multiple storylines, multiple characters, and they all have emotional weight to them for multiple different reasons. And I think that is something that is just super well done. And once again, such a short book. It's honestly very impressive what he was able to do. And then the last thing I do want to mention here is something that I really enjoyed, is anytime there's a sequel to a series that I feel like wraps up very, very well, and that is something that I can say about the original trilogy, is I think the ending of it left me in a very satisfied place. So when I heard there was a sequel, I was like, do I really need a sequel? I was not apprehensive, because I did kind of want one. I wanted to continue on with some of the characters and everything and see what happened after the events of the last book. But at the same time, I'm like, I would totally be okay if we never went back to that world, or maybe there was a bigger gap, so there's none of those legacy characters, or maybe we get mention of them, but they're not actually there in present. And then also, with what happens at the end of the original trilogy, what kind of conflict that you are going to set up in this book, I think it ends up working really well. And it's this really great blend of paying homage to the original trilogy, making sure the impacts and the things that happen, the events that happen, matter moving into this one, while still letting this one breathe and really be its own thing. It's not just a, hey, look at what we did in the past story. This is definitely a step forward in this world. And I think that is something that is super well done. And I have seen other series not handle it as well, where you, like I said, you either completely throw away your legacy characters, you treat them in ways that I don't think they should be treated, or it's all just about the legacy characters and you never get that forward momentum into the series. I definitely think that is not something that happens here. And these are all things that I immensely enjoyed about this book. And now we have to do the thing where we talk about things that maybe you didn't like. These necessarily aren't things that didn't work for me. If we're being honest, actually, none of these were really a problem for me. But as I was reading the book, I do sometimes try to think of, how would other people feel about this, because I know I'm going to make some videos about them. So one of the things that I thought maybe would bother people is something that I'm going to call fast travel. And so this is actually something that worked for me. And this actually goes into the pacing of this book and the way it was written. When we're traveling, we're not spending the entire journey it takes for characters to get from point A to point B. It's like in a video game where, okay, I'm in this place and now we need to be in this place. Let's go ahead and get there, right? We don't need to spend 20 minutes walking from one place to another in a video game. Similar thing happens here where these characters are in a place and then we're kind of in another. Maybe there was a conflict or something that happened. We kind of solve that, and then let's get to where we're trying to go. And I think it was a very interesting thing for me. Like I said, I actually liked it. I think it was a good change of pace. But I think it is something that maybe bothers some people where they want to be there for the entire thing. They don't want any of that fast travel, as I'm calling it. So it is something I could see maybe bothering people. With that being said, in a similar kind of vein, this is obviously not as epic in scale and scope as the original trilogy. So if you're coming from the original trilogy wanting something that's as big and as epic, well, this is one 300-page book versus three trilogies with two of those books being like very, very long, right? And so I think you need to probably level set your expectations. And, I could definitely see people still enjoying this book, but saying they kind of are yearning for the bigger overarching epicness that was the original trilogy when they get to this. And it is, I'm not going to say it's not epic, but it's not as epic as the original trilogy. So I could see some people maybe struggling with that or making that adjustment. For me, once again, not really a problem. The next thing I could see maybe bothering some people is what I'm going to call playing the hits. And what I mean by that is it kind of comes back to the legacy characters. I know people who prefer not spending as much time as we do in books like this with the legacy characters. And there's almost maybe a little bit of a repeated nature of going to point A and there being a legacy character, going to point B, there's a legacy character, going to point C, there being a legacy character. There is a little bit of a rhythm there. I will say, I think this book actually ends up handling that extremely well. I don't think this is a very predictive book, so I'll say that. But I could see maybe some people being a little bit exhausted by it, but I think it's very much counter to this book. It's everything happens at such a quick pace. I can't personally relate to that, but I do know there are some people who maybe are going to be like, oh, we're doing this again, but I don't know. I definitely think that especially the ending of this book makes everything completely worth it. The ending of this book is definitely very explosive. And then unfortunately, the one thing that I think might be something that people really don't like or don't understand is there is a relationship that happens. And that's all I'm going to say, because it's one of those things where I can't talk about it in a non-spoiler way, unfortunately, but I will be very curious to see what people's reactions are to what I'm just going to call that relationship. That relationship, I think, is going to be a very interesting thing for people who get their hands on this book and read it. It's something I'm probably the most excited to talk about in that spoiler chat that I mentioned earlier in this video. So sorry to be so ominous and vague, but there is something that I do think people will look at and really maybe scratch their head a little bit about. I think it works, and for me, it does work. But I will be curious if everybody else feels the same way. So that is what I wanted to talk about for this book. Definitely let me know if you have read it, if you have any thoughts. Once again, I know I was extremely vague, but I didn't want to spoil, 4 books here for anybody. So once again, I do think this is absolutely worth reading. If you enjoyed the original trilogy, I don't see how you don't enjoy this. If you haven't read the original trilogy, I really do think you should. I really think that especially by the end, that last book is just absolutely phenomenal. And I know other people feel the same way about all of the books. So, this is definitely a series that if you've heard some of the buzz about, I definitely think you should check out. But once again, definitely talk to me down below in the comments or on the Discord that will all be linked down in the description as always. But that's all for me. And remember, read what you want when you want.